After spending over a year in prison and being falsely accused of sexual abuse, George Cardinal Pell is here to tell his story and share his new book about the experience, Prison Journal, Volume 1. And later, to react to the Pell interview and recap the most important stories of the year and the most important people, I'm joined by the papal posse, Robert Royal and Father GERALD MURRAY, in their last ride of the year. Finally, Grammy-winning recording artist Jose Feliciano joins me to celebrate the 50th anniversary of his Christmas classic, Feliz Navidad. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. What a lineup we have for you tonight. George Cardinal Pell, Robert Royal, Father GERALD MURRAY, and Jose Feliciano are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. Let's get right to it. In 2017, Cardinal George Pell left the Vatican Secretariat for the Economy to face outrageous charges of sexual molestation allegedly occurring in his Melbourne cathedral in 1996. After a mistrial in 2018, a second trial unanimously convicted him, and he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Cardinal Pell was then incarcerated for 404 days until Australia's High Court unanimously acquitted and released him this past April. Joining us to discuss his new book, Prison Journal, Volume 1, The Cardinal Makes His Appeal, chronicling his first 5 months behind bars and more, is His Eminence, George Cardinal Pell. Your Eminence, thank you for being here.
Raymond, it's a pleasure. I've got very fond memories of EWTN.
Well, thank you for joining us. Now, Your Eminence, you wrote every day in prison as a discipline. Was it always your intention that you would publish this journal?
Not necessarily. I didn't write primarily for it to be published. I was aware that I would offer it for publication. Because it went in 3 or 4 different directions, I wasn't exactly sure whether all of it would be suitable or it would have to be edited or cut up into sections. So I was aware of the possibility, but that wasn't the primary concern.
At one point you write, quote, "My fate has serious repercussions for the Church, especially in Australia, but more widely because of my advocacy of crucifixion Christianity. There seems little doubt that my social conservatism and advocacy of the Judeo-Christian ethic have sharpened popular hostility, especially among the militant secularists. I believe in God's providence. I never chose this situation and worked hard to avoid it, but here I am, and I must strive to do God's will." What did you think God's will was for you at that time? And did you ever think you might not be released?
Well, I'm sure, I was quite sure that God's will was for me to go ahead with a bit of discipline and dignity and make the best of my situation. And once you accepted your lowly status as a prisoner, that nothing happens quickly, you're completely at the beck and call of others, it's not too bad a life. I said once or twice it was a little bit like a worldly retreat, because I had my own television set and a kettle, which at least in most of the retreats I've done, I've never had. I was sure I was going to get out, even if it was after 3 or 4 years of the 6 years, but I was never certain that I was going to win my appeal. I thought I'd win the state appeal, and so I was absolutely flabbergasted when that was voted down by 2 of the judges. So I was aware that these things weren't always decided on logic or on the evidence.
Your Eminence, when these charges first dropped, you could have declared diplomatic immunity and stayed at the Vatican. I mean, you at that time had a Vatican passport. I assume you have one now. Why didn't you just stay in Rome and avoid
correct.
these charges?
Oh, because I was innocent, and that would have been very bad for me, very bad for the church, as though I was frightened to face up to my accusers and the accusations. I never for a moment thought that I would lurk in the Vatican avoiding the charges. I went home to prove my innocence, and that's exactly what I did. Mind you, it was a long, drawn-out business, longer than I would have liked.
I'll say. Keith Windschuttle, a former Australian Broadcasting Corp board member and author of a book about your trial, has warned that, quote, any one of us could now be accused by strangers of reprehensible behavior and then find the weight of the nation's structures of law, government, and public opinion piled on top of us. The whole case was based on a fundamental overturning of traditions of law. There wasn't a presumption of innocence. There was a presumption of guilt. Do you agree with that appraisal of your case, the way it proceeded? And do you feel, Cardinal Pell, that you were a scapegoat for the crimes of the Church and the way it dealt with abuse in the past?
I do think Windschuttle's book is a very fine book. I have read most of it, if not all of it. I think his diagnosis is correct. If public opinion is strongly against a certain group, I think it was an example of identity politics, certainly of a spokesperson for that group. It can make it very, very difficult. I mean, I think the prosecutors in my case refused on 3 occasions to take the case forward. And that, I believe, I might be wrong, was eventually done by the police. So was I a scapegoat? To some extent. I believe that in the courts, some of my friends have reported that bystanders, some people have written to me about conversations they've had, and sometimes the conversation went like this: yes, he might be innocent, he might in fact have not done these things, but the Church deserves to be punished for the way they've dealt so badly with this crisis. And in many cases we did deal badly until the early 90s or the mid-90s.
Yeah. No, I remember when we had individuals who were partial to your case and believed in your innocence, and they would come and report on various steps in the trial and throughout the process, and we got ferociously attacked by some of your countrymen in the media for how dare you have this man on, how dare you suggest that he's innocent, Cardinal Pell is a guilty man. I mean, the media pressure here was intense. You had to feel some of that even in prison.
Yes, to some extent I did, but to some extent I was used to it over the years. And I'm also very clearer than ever, that we mustn't buckle to that sort of pressure. We've got to stand up to it. We have to make our case cogently, courteously, with reason. And as I said, it is a question of identity politics. And a lot of those people don't appeal to reason. They make their decision and then condemn a person with a different point of view and all the other people who hold that point of view too. It represents a decline in public life, the decline in rational discussion.
Throughout the journal, and I want to talk about the spiritual aspect here, you reflect on the nature of suffering. And in one entry you write that for the first time in 70 years you were not able to attend or celebrate the Mass. How difficult was that for you? How did you deal with that?
Well, it was difficult, perhaps not as difficult as you might imagine, because I knew that God was with me. The authorities were reasonable. They allowed me to have my breviary, the official prayer of the Church, from the first night. I knew that I couldn't celebrate the Mass. There was nothing I could do to change that. So I just settled down into a daily routine of prayer. And as I said, I knew God wasn't going to abandon me because I couldn't say daily Mass.
You prayed daily, you write in the book, for victims of sexual abuse, specifically pedophilia. What do you think of your accusers now and those who are still convinced of your guilt? What would you say to them?
Well, for those who are still convinced of my guilt, I'm tempted to quote something allegedly Dr. Mannix, a famous Archbishop of Melbourne, said, and that is, you know, everyone has a right to be foolish if they think it wise. Now, I would just suggest to those people who feel, I'm guilty, just to, well, say, read Keith Windschuttle's book. Look at the judgment of the High Court. We can put our case, and then people are free to accept it or reject it.
You write in one section here, I think it was in April of 2019, if memory serves, about a message that was sent to you purportedly from Our Lady through a visionary named Christina Gallagher. And she wrote that Our Lady had told her that the reason the power of darkness overshadowed you with false accusations was the work that you had been doing to correct financial wrongdoing and sexual misbehavior in the Vatican. Now, you and your lawyers have made the case that there might be a connection here. Is there an ongoing investigation into possible links there? Do you think there's a link there?
Well, the long and the short of it is, at the moment, people continue to be interested in the topic. Whether there's any official police investigation continuing, I don't know. I know the Victorian police are no longer following it up. I think they passed the word down that the monies went to respectable charities. I'm not quite sure that that is the case. So there's plenty of smoke, but we don't know. We don't have proof, and you have to have proof before you can make specific claims. But I think it's highly likely that money went from the Vatican, highly likely, but just what was its purpose is not clear, except that it wasn't an official purpose linked to the official Australian Church. So we don't know. But my lawyers were always a bit sceptical about this. And they were very keen, of course, it didn't intrude into the police case, into the prosecution or our defence against the prosecution, and it didn't. But it's a story that's not over, and we'll just see. A great investigator from Wales, Christopher Friel, written 150 articles on this, and he and others keep quoting Kant, the philosopher, which says that truth is the child of time. So let's just see where we go on this.
I agree. During your time at the Secretariat for the Economy, you encountered resistance from some Vatican officials here. I mean, it's particularly Italian Cardinal Angelo Becciu, then Deputy Secretary of State, who wanted Vatican departments to continue controlling their own funds. He forced out, just as an aside, the independent auditors that you brought in, as well as the Vatican's first Auditor General. Now, in September, Pope Francis fired Becciu, accusing him of nepotism and embezzlement. Do you feel vindicated by that action and the latest revelations we're hearing out of the Vatican related to wild investment schemes and cash payments and the like?
Look, I'm not here to be the Cardinal's prosecutor. He's got a right to due process, and I think the press seem to suggest he will be charged. He has a right to his day in court. you are absolutely correct. He did arrange or insist that the international auditors be fired, and he did arrange for the dismissal of our auditor, Libero Maloney. He has more or less boasted about those things. It's a fiasco, the London business, an absolute fiasco. They've lost tens of millions. One thing I am pleased about, I had a fear that many of these schmozzles, these lapses, would remain hidden, and in 10 years' time it would become apparent, and then the same dark, nefarious forces would say, well, that was the time Pell was in charge and he did nothing. It's become quite clear how many disasters there were, and it's now well and truly on the public record how we fought regularly and strongly against these abuses. So I'm pleased, for the sake of the historical record, that a good deal of the truth is now universally known.
Mm-hmm. Your Eminence, in a recent interview, you said that the great challenge that lies before the Vatican is that it's slowly going broke. What needs to be done at this point to clean things up at the Vatican Bank? And are some of the protocols that you initially put into place when you served at the Secretariat for the Economy, are those being implemented at all?
Well, the first thing to say, the Vatican Bank is often said to be Eeyore. That's what most people think. It isn't technically the Vatican Bank. That's money from outside the Vatican. And that is basically cleaned up and is running at a profit and is well led by John Baptista Francu and by Mummy, the General Director. So that's one part of the show that's going well. My successor is honest and competent, and they're putting into place, they are implementing the procedures. There was nothing revolutionary about them. It was just best practice from around the world. They are doing that. I think they have recognized exactly where they are. And if you're in difficulties, if you can accurately chart where you are, then you have a much better chance of doing something to address them. And I certainly wish the Holy Father well. He wants to set up an investment board of experts, a small group of honest and senior and capable men, and get them to decide where all the Vatican investments should go, so we can break with this shadowy world of corrupt or semi-corrupt or dubious figures who've been circling the Vatican for decades. The Holy Father's announced, Pope Francis has announced that this is to be done. It was recommended by COSEA, the first committee that investigated. We tried to do it. I'm delighted it's being done now. And one thing we've got to do, of course, is get a good return on our investments. Nothing disproportionate or unjust, but you know, if you have 300 properties, as one agency in the Vatican does, and received from those 300 properties only 60,000 euros, obviously there's a big question mark. There's work to be done there.
Mm-hmm. Have you been asked to play a role in any of these reform protocols vis-a-vis the Vatican Bank or investments since your return to Rome?
No. Look, I'm 7 months off turning 80. Rome, as I said to someone in the last 24 hours, Rome is full of 80-year-old plus cardinals looking for something more to do. So no, I don't have any regular role at all. But the Holy Father has said if I ever want to drop him a note or make a suggestion, he's always happy to hear it. But I won't be doing that regularly, if at all.
Well, those 80-year-old
I have
cardinals,
confidence in my successors.
With all due respect, those 80-year-old cardinals don't have your track record, haven't been vindicated, and frankly haven't gone through the blades that you have to defend not only the truth, but the right path here, a transparent path for the church at large. So with all due respect, I think your voice is needed, but I'll leave that to higher authorities than I. You reflect on retired popes, Your Eminence, in the book. And you write that the protocols on the situation of a pope who has resigned needs to be clarified. And this is what you write. While the retired pope could retain the title of Pope Emeritus, he should be renominated to the College of Cardinals so that he is known as Cardinal ex-Pope Emeritus. He should not wear the white papal soutane and should not teach publicly. Because of the reverence and love for the Pope, many will feel reluctant to impose such restrictions on someone who once held the See of Peter. Now, your thoughts on this. Do you feel having essentially two popes in play here, has that confused the populace? And what would be your recommendation then to Pope Benedict?
I wouldn't be making any recommendation to Pope Benedict. I am a great devotee of His Holiness. I very much follow his line. He was a magnificent teacher. I think he'll be a doctor of the church. But if I could lapse a little bit, I don't think we should make it too easy for popes to resign or retire. I really think that generally the popes should remain. Now, if they're hit by a massive stroke and they can't do anything, obviously, that is a time for retirement. So we're coping at the moment. But you see, we in the Catholic Church take our unity for granted. It's not. It's a miracle. It's something wonderful. Yes. Look at the situation of the Orthodox Church with churches with whom we share so much. They tried to have a church council a few years ago, and they couldn't get even some of the national hierarchies to attend. Unity is precious. We shouldn't play with it. We should be aware of what a blessing it is, and we should take appropriate measures for the future to encourage the Pope to stay, and if they do step down, that church unity is not indirectly or unintentionally impaired in any way whatsoever.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. The Pope should die with his white zacchetto on and take it to the end. John Paul was right about that. I think the confusion here is that every pope has to be as available or as globetrotting as John Paul. That, I think, was his particular charism. Every pope doesn't have to follow it. And I think there's a perception that we have to see the Pope everywhere. That's not true. There were centuries where no one saw the Pope. He was a figure locked away in Rome. So I agree with you. Unity is precious.
Well, and also, you see, in the early centuries, probably the primary function internationally for the Church of Rome and for the bishop that headed the Church was Rome, was to have the last word on the apostolic tradition, to be able to assure people that what they were being taught was what Christ and the apostles taught. And so, the Holy Father doesn't have to be an evangelist. It's an enormous advantage. The popularity of Pope Francis in all sorts of circles which traditionally haven't been particularly open to the Christian message is good, but the central teaching function of the papacy is to guarantee the apostolic tradition. And of course, that's one of the first tasks of every bishop. I've got no authority over the tradition. I, like you, stand under the tradition. I've got to teach it and defend it. And so every bishop has, and so, of course, is the Holy Father, which he gladly recognizes.
Cardinal Pell, what do you want people to take away from this book, and why did you decide to publish it in 3 volumes? Why not edit it down to 1?
That's a very good question, and you'd have to ask the publishers that. They decided to go in 3 volumes. I was well aware of the possibility of doing it in 1. Look, I'm often asked whether I've been changed by the experience, and I say I can't note much improvement, but I have an even deeper conviction that the Christian package works. And so I have written these words. I believe in crucifixion Christianity. It doesn't end with the crucifixion. It certainly ends with the resurrection. So I think I offer my book for people who are in difficulty. Perhaps people might get a little bit of consolation from the basic Christian teachings, just as I did. And there's no salvation for the church in pretending that we know better than Christ, that we can somehow downplay some of his teachings, we can cut some of them out, we can improve radically. Now, obviously, theological development, doctrinal development within the tradition is over 2,000 years. It's a fact of history. But as I've said on other occasions, with development of doctrine, there are no backflips. There are no spectacular deviations or overturning. We've got a precious tradition, and we've got to defend it and explain it.
Your Eminence, what a joy to talk with you. I'm delighted that you are back among us and that these trials are behind you. I have a little family book. I wrote a little picture book, and I often say it's about finding hope in the darkest of places. But when I read your book, this is really finding hope in the darkest of places. The Prison Journal, Volume 1, The Cardinal Makes His Appeal by George Cardinal Pell, published by Ignatius Press. It's available at bookstores everywhere and online, including EWTN's religious catalog at EWTNRC.com. Your Eminence, thank you for being with us. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I hope I'm invited.
Oh, you bet. Anytime. There's an open door. It's been refreshing and wonderful to talk with you. Thank you. Joining me now to react to the Pell interview, plus the big stories of 2020, and to unveil our Persons of the Year, is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org and visiting fellow at Thomas More College, Robert Royal, as well as canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father GERALD MURRAY. Thank you both for being here. Gentlemen, I want to get your reaction to this very candid Pell interview and the book. The Cardinal said at one point, it's highly likely that money went from the Vatican to Australia, but the purpose is not clear. Your thoughts on that? Father Jerry.
Well, Raymond, that is interesting that the Cardinal referred to that. There was a media report about a large sum of money being sent to the nunciature in Australia, and then there was a second report that the nuncio from Australia came to Rome and met with Pope Francis, and he was the nuncio at the time that that money was transferred. So undoubtedly that is part of the investigation. It's known, and the Cardinal says it in the interview, that he was at cross purposes with Cardinal Becciu. And as we know, Cardinal Becciu has been demoted by Pope Francis based on charges related to other matters that appear to indicate corruption, financial corruption in particular. So, as the Cardinal says, there is an investigation going on. I'm very interested to see where it leads.
Robert Royal, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was very much impressed, both in the book and in the interview you did, Raymond, with his calmness of spirit. He kind of is a believer that truth is what we're all based in, and that eventually truth will win out. And this from a man who knows that he was regarded as a member of the group of deplorables. He even uses that term in his book, in the state of Victoria in Australia, which meant that they wanted to punish someone. Now, we don't know if there was skullduggery in the background, but it's certainly suspicious when 700,000 euros, I think it was, or Australian dollars, I forget the denomination, but a huge amount of money went to Australia, and someone has got to track down and see what that is. It's not implausible, but we'll find out sometime.
Yeah. Moving on, I want to talk about these religious lockdowns we've seen across the country, gentlemen, in California, New York, Virginia, where you are, Robert. Give me a sense of your read on whether the bishops have been vocal enough this year about these rolling lockdowns that have now affected certainly the major metropolitan areas across the country. Have they said enough, Robert Royal?
Well, individual bishops, I think, have. We know that even Wilton Gregory, Cardinal Archbishop Wilton Gregory in D.C., has sued the District of Columbia over the lockdowns there. In my state, here in Virginia, our church is rather strong, and we've got a rather aggressive governor who's foolishly said the other day that, you know, where is God? And we can always pray to God.
Yeah, well, I'm going to play that for you in a second.
Yeah, I mean, he's the kind of guy who he's got personal problems of his own that we don't need to go in right now, but he just thinks he can kind of massage these things in whatever way he wants. I think that certain bishops, certainly out in California, the bishop in Brooklyn, where Andrew Cuomo has tried to shut down houses of worship to 10 people, no matter how large your church is. 10 people, this is absolutely ridiculous. I would have liked to have seen a better coordinated national response to this, but given the way that things are in different jurisdictions, maybe that's the best we can hope for right now. And I'm proud of those who have stepped out and spoken forcefully.
Father Jerry, the governors throughout the country, as Bob alluded to, are still trying to keep people out of churches. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, who Bob was referencing there, had this to say about church worship during the holidays in a press conference last week. Listen to this. Give me your reaction.
This year, we need to think about what is truly the most important thing. Is it the worship or the building? For me, God is wherever you are. You don't have to sit in the church pew for God to hear your prayers.
Father Jerry, should we all just stay home, forget church? I feel God in my heart while I'm watching the NFL game.
Wow. I mean, how often do we have the governors and others criticizing bishops and priests to tell them what to do, particularly on our issues of morality? And here he is trying to instruct us on how to conduct divine worship. This is ridiculous. That governor and my own governor here in New York, they need to step back and say that the right to religious freedom in the United States is primary, and therefore they have to use every means possible to allow people to worship God. And that is decided by the people themselves to say, well, you can stay home. Okay, who appointed you the head religious advisor to the people of your state? That's ridiculous. Leave that alone.
No, I agree. And you saw that Supreme Court ruling that touched on what was happening in your state, in New York, where they said, look, you've got to look at these regulations in light of the Constitution. And it seems we have a rolling series of rulings referring back to that Supreme Court ruling. So that's a good sign. Now, a new administration is coming. They've made it clear, the Biden administration, that they plan to go after religious groups such as the Little Sisters of the Poor over that contraceptive mandate. What are the religious liberty dangers that you see on the horizon, not only for religious institutions, but believing individuals? Robert Royal.
Well, we just heard today that the Biden administration is being lobbied by some of the LGBT groups in that they want religious schools to have to adhere to the reigning ideology for them with regard to gender identity. And this, I think that we're going to see this come along very strongly. What they're doing is they're saying that these are science-based positions. In other words, that science tells us that gender is fluid and that we can't restrict people to male and female. He created. And this is just one of the groups of institutions. I mean, we're going to see, as the Catholic Church has the largest religious school network in the nation, of course, by far. And I think we're going to see pressure not only on them, the Little Sisters of the Poor. We've already seen pressure on groups that sponsor foster children. It's going to become quite radical, and it's going to reach into every nook and cranny where religious groups are active. And that's going to mean even poor relief and hospitals and other things. To me, this is shaping up. We know that The president-elect has appointed Becerra as his Health and Human Services secretary. We'll see if that gets through the Senate, by the way. But all these are signs that I'm saying that he is the first anti-Catholic president in the United States. We've had John F. Kennedy, who was kind of nominally Catholic, but at least he was Catholic and didn't oppose the church in public. Now we're going to see on abortion, on marriage, on sexual issues, and much more. I fear we're going to see a very aggressive new administration that ironically is going to be led by a person who likes to sport rosaries and yet manages to support the killing of 1 million babies in the womb a year and opposes what the church believes about marriage. It's really going to be a hairy time for not only Catholics but other religious believers in America.
Father Jerry, what position does this put the U.S. bishops in? If indeed you have a president who is manifestly Catholic, he claims to be Catholic, yet he opposes the church on so many of the issues that it advances, while sort of wrapping all of his agenda in this religious talk. I mean, I watch these publications swoon over, oh, he mentioned St. Francis, oh, he mentioned Pope Francis, oh, he mentioned St. Teresa. If you're punishing their daughters and sons, how does that add up? Why is that not looked at as hypocrisy rather than something to be lauded?
Well, here we face the big challenge, and the bishops have appointed a committee to deal with the challenges that are going to come forward. But the fact of the matter is, President-elect Biden has pledged to promote abortion, gender identity, the greater acceptance for transgenderism and all the attendant evils which go with that. Right now, I'm afraid that we're going to be seeing the Catholic Church declared a hate group. The Bible is going to be considered a hate text, and precisely because the Bible affirms reality, which is God made man and woman. Male and female is not an identity, it is nature, it is what we are. No one's assigned a gender at birth. That's ridiculous. Is anybody assigned a set of teeth? No, we recognize you have teeth in your mouth, that you have eyes and ears, and you recognize you're a male or a female. So what we have to do is basically get back to what it's called metaphysical realism. And the bishops have to promote an intellectual response to what's going on here. It's not enough to say, well, this policy is bad. No, we have to say the ideology which falsifies God's creation is a threat to the whole order of society. That's not alarmism. That's not alarmism at all. That's reality. And reality has to win. Otherwise, we enter the unreal world of dictatorship.
Looking back at some of the stories that have made headlines in the church this year, the McCarrick report was certainly one. Bob, we spent a lot of time on this, hoping it would come. It finally came. Did that report bring clarity and closure to the McCarrick case in your mind?
Well, what it gave us was what the church as an institution recognized in its documents, in the records that it had, about how McCarrick was promoted and perhaps some elements of a cover-up. It's useful to have that because it puts on the record what's actually in the files insofar as the people responsible were willing to release those files. Of course, it doesn't solve the larger question of how McCarrick was able to do what he did. And he did things not only on the way up in the church. I think as we see with the acceptance of politicians like Joe Biden in the United States, he was also at the center of making it acceptable for Catholics like this to exist in public. I mean, I've seen Biden say about abortion or homosexuality, it's a debate in the church, so it's like a political conversation. There's no sense that there are fundamental things at stake that lead us back to Christ, what Christ himself intended for the way we are supposed to live and what our institutions are supposed to be. So look, we got a peek into some of the institutional developments that allowed McCarrick to come forward, but there is much, much more that still has to be done. And I fear that's going to have to be done not by figures inside the Vatican who, for various reasons, regard these things as hot potatoes that they don't want to get too deeply into. We're going to have to see people on the outside digging into this. And As with the Pell case, the truth eventually will be known. We'll know what happened.
Mm-hmm. Father Jerry, the Holy See officially renewed their agreement with China in October. Cardinal Zen of Hong Kong has been for years particularly outspoken about this deal. In October, he had this to say in an interview with me about the renewal of that Vatican-China deal.
All the facts which follow the signing of the agreement all speak against the agreement because we see no improvement, but only the hardening of the position of the government, and the persecution is much more harsh than before.
Father Jerry, what did the Vatican get out of renewing this deal? They saw the carnage and fallout, the destruction of church property and church members in the first iteration of this.
Look, this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest errors of this pontificate. It has to do with a political decision that negotiating with the Chinese communists rather than supporting the underground church and opposing the communist power was the way to go. And I completely agree with Cardinal Zen. The Vatican is engaged in concession after concession. Cardinal Zen has spoken eloquently about the ordination of men to the episcopate, or the recognition of bishops ordained illegally, that somehow this is good. And many of these men are not worthy to be bishops. Their lifestyle is not good. What we have here, unfortunately, is a decision that negotiation with communists is possible. And, you know, my reading of history and the way I see things, communists love it when people from the West show up at their doorstep and say, what do you want us to do? Because they know exactly what they want us to do. The communists want us to surrender to them. And I view this as a surrender. Cardinal Zen is a heroic man. There are heroic bishops and priests who are imprisoned because of the communist government. We shouldn't be negotiating with them. We should be telling them the religion of Christ stands firm with Christ, and we will not give communist appointees control over the flock. That's unfortunately what's happened.
Yeah, and they've blessed and sanctified these people who just a few years ago were considered outside the church. They were excommunicated. So it's an amazing turnaround. And again, I don't know what the transaction here is. What do they get out of the deal? Maybe it's money, but it's certainly not any freedom for their flock or those who deeply believe and cling to Rome. Bob, even with no details known, we don't know all the details of this deal. It's never been released. Why has the Vatican remained so silent when it comes to religious persecution in China or Hong Kong, but they have no trouble speaking up in other regions of the world where religious persecution is underway?
Well, of course, that's the main question, isn't it? I mean, we even hear now from secular sources that there's vivisection going on, that the Chinese are taking Uyghur Muslim prisoners and carving them up to sell their organs on the international market. It's a very lucrative practice. And it's the case that for whatever reason, the Pope cannot raise his voice. I don't see, why, even if there is an agreement, we can't raise our voices against abuses against even others. There was a slight reference in the Pope's new book to the oppression of Uyghur Muslims in China, and the Chinese government instantly jumped on. So there must be something in the agreement that is a kind of a hair trigger. That is, the minute that there's a criticism coming out of the Vatican in public, somehow this seems to be a violation of what they regard as the settled principles of what this is. But since we don't know what this agreement is, and there aren't supposed to be international treaties made that are secret treaties, since we don't know what's in that treaty, we can only assume from the way that the Vatican behaves that there's some pretty strong muzzles that have been applied to the kind of normal criticism that one would have about any regime. The American regime or Latin America, they're all imperfect, and yet this is the one regime that we cannot say anything about. It's a caving into ideology, and it's a caving into liars. I mean, I've dealt with some of these religious officials in China. They were some of the biggest liars I've ever run into in Washington, D.C.
I want to shift gears to something that on the surface may seem light, but I think it tells us a great deal. This year's Vatican Nativity, it's very contemporary. This set, made in a region of Italy, took 10 years to create. It was created between 1965 and 1975, curiously. It includes a spaceman, some Darth Vader-like character. We don't quite know who he's supposed to represent. In his letter, Admirabile Signum, signed in December of 2019, Pope Francis wrote, "It is customary to add many symbolic figures to our nativity scenes, figures that have no apparent connection to the gospel accounts, yet each in his own way, these fanciful additions show that in the new world inaugurated by Jesus, there is room for whatever is truly human and for all God's creatures." The fact that this nativity was created in the 60s or 70s tells me a lot, Father Jerry. Art often reflects the reality of the time one imagines oneself to be in or holds up as an ideal. Your reaction, and why would the Vatican put a nativity that has figures like this? It has nothing to do with the Bible. They don't even try to explain who they represent, this spaceman and that ninja warrior or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah, this is can only be described as horrifying. One of the worst aspects of the 60s culture was, non-representational art or art that distorted the human figure to produce weirdness. And this is what we see here. This is supposed to be a devotional setting so that pilgrims to Rome can pray in front of the nativity scene and give thanks to God for the incarnation. This kind of art rejects the theology of the incarnation. Humanity is not a perfect creation from God. Instead, we've got to invent, like Lego-like figures or Darth Vader. This is really an offense, and you have to say there are people who use this kind of art in order to overthrow philosophy and theology, which affirms the immutable nature of God's creation and the beauty of it, which is inherent. And that's why, when people go to Rome, where do they go? They go to the Renaissance churches. They want to see the beauty of art, the great works of art. They don't want to see what essentially is a nightmare from artists who take inspiration from things that are really fake. There's no astronaut at the birth of Christ. Why is that person there? That's crazy.
Yeah. Now, Bob, I'm going to give you a quick crack at this, 30 seconds, because we have to move on here. But it looked like Fisher Price in Purgatory or something. These are bizarre-looking figures.
My question is, if we didn't know that was a nativity scene, would anybody think that it is a nativity scene? I mean, it's clearly the kind of thing that, look, if an artist wants to do this on his own time somewhere else, that's great. But as a nativity scene in St. Peter's Square in 2020, a year that we've all been so troubled. It's telling, by the way, that on Wednesday in his general audience, the Pope was sitting in a chair and he had a more traditional nativity scene right next to him. So maybe that was... I noticed that. Yeah, that the powers that be maybe have done that thing in St. Peter's Square with or without the Pope's knowledge. But there was a kind of a recanting, I think, in that visual image on Wednesday.
Yeah. No, well, as an artist who's in Rome, they sent me a note earlier, and they said, well, it is an improvement over the naked guy. Remember the naked guy last year that they had at the edges of the nativity? So, well, so maybe Fisher Price is a step up. We'll see. Now to our world over persons of the year. We wrestled this year over who that person should be. Ultimately, we decided that the people of the year should be Chinese, for resisting tyranny and for their willingness to risk life and liberty to alert the world to Beijing's brutality and fight for religious and personal freedoms. Our persons of the year are Cardinal Joseph Zen and Jimmy Lai. We originally were going to name the man who probably had the most impact on 2020, but I felt guilty about it, Chairman Xi Jinping. Look, he unleashed a virus that destroyed lives and global economies. He no doubt had an impact upon the presidential election here in the United States, compromised governments around the globe. He even managed to sign a deal, as we talked about a moment ago, with the Vatican that bought their silence as he rounded up faithful Catholics, Christians, Muslims, as well as freedom fighters. Xi taught the world how to make people follow orders and restrict freedoms. For that, Xi Jinping is our shadow person of the year. But we thought it better to extend the light rather than curse the darkness. Gents, I want to give you the last word, your reaction to this, and your thoughts for people as we go into this new year? Father Jerry, you first.
Well, that's a very good choice. Cardinal Zen, Jimmy Lai, a Catholic convert. These are wonderful men. I want to just throw my secondary honoree of the year would be Amy Coney Barrett and the President of the United States, if I can do that, because if we can thank God for Catholic teaching and Catholics who are faithful, I think Amy Coney Barrett is somebody who fits that category. And the President, God bless him, he fulfilled his promise to Catholics and all people of firm belief in human life that he would appoint a judge to the Supreme Court who was going to, in fact, uphold the law and not rewrite it.
Yeah, and you know, he got vilified this year. I mean, it's a political year, so of course he would be. But when you step back and look at his gains in the Middle East, his pro-life and religious liberty policy moves, it's very hard to quibble with any of those. Robert Royal.
Well, Raymond, I'm not going to reveal any of the back and forth we privately had about some of these possible candidates for the President of the Year. But I'll say yay to all of the above, and I'll also add Pfizer and Moderna, because I'm hoping that that's too something that the President and our marvelous American healthcare system were able to develop in record time. Let's hope that this brings about a remarkable change. I mean, everybody's criticized the president about this, said it would take a miracle to have a vaccine before the end of the year. And look, we've got 2 and maybe 3 and even more coming down the line. So it's been a rough year. I can't say that it can never get rougher because we know what's coming down the line. It's about to get a lot worse in Washington. But look, we've at least got the virus a little bit under control. And at least that will give us a chance to fight differently in 2021.
Let us pray. Gentlemen, thank you both, and I want to wish you and your loved ones a very Merry Christmas. Commentary by Robert Royal and Father Jerry Murray can be found at thecatholicthing.org, and Columbus and the Crisis of the West by Robert Royal is still available at the EWTN Religious Catalog. Thank you both. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Raymond.
Merry Christmas.
Feliz Navidad. Feliz Navidad, Feliz Navidad, próspero año y felicidad. Oye, Ramón.
It was November of 1970 when that song was first released, eventually becoming a ubiquitous Christmas standard. Jose Feliciano's Feliz Navidad is now one of the best known and loved Christmas songs ever recorded. And just this week, it reappeared on Billboard's Top 10 for the first time since it was released. He joins us tonight to talk about the 50th anniversary of that timeless holiday hit single, his new children's book, and a special live stream Christmas concert coming up this Sunday, December 20th. I'm so pleased he's with us, particularly at Christmas time. Here's my interview with Jose Feliciano, joined by the author of Jose Feliciano's Feliz Navidad, Helen Murphy. Take a look. Jose, back in the late 60s, you were coming off a controversial performance of the national anthem at the '68 World Series. We've talked about this in the past. And you thought your career may have been over at that point. And then in 1970, you're working on a Christmas record with your producer, Rick Gerard, and he made a fateful request of you. What was it, and what did you think at the time?
Well, the request was, Jose, you ought to write a new Christmas song. I told Rick, I said, Rick, I don't know how I could write a new Christmas song after Rocking Around the Christmas Tree by Brenda Lee. And, well, that's what I thought then.
And where did the song idea come from, Feliz Navidad? How did that idea begin?
Well, Raymond, the idea came from being lonely for my family, for our traditions. And that's precisely why I wrote it, to feel closer to my family in Puerto Rico and to let people know that I'm Puerto Rican and proud.
Why do you think Feliz Navidad has endured all of these years, 5 decades? Jose, I'll start with you and then Helen.
Because it's a great song.
Well,
Okay,
Raymond,
Helen, your answer.
I think it is a great song, but more important than that, it was born out of Jose's desire to be more united with his family and his culture in Puerto Rico while he was away. And I think the love and joy in that song has brought the world together year after year after year. And it evokes a magic in people when they hear it.
When I heard the original, I couldn't believe it. I thought to myself, Jose, this is a hit. And I then thought, well, if only the public would think that this is a hit, and every year that went by, they played it a little more, and pretty soon, here we are. And I'm thrilled.
You've also released a children's book, Jose Feliciano's Feliz Navidad, which, Helen, you wrote, casting Jose as a superhero of sorts. Now, aside from his superpowers, where did you get this notion to create Jose in a flying car as a superhero, bringing mirth and joy to the world?
The reason that I portrayed Jose as a music superhero, and he's going to fight with me in a minute that he's not a hero, is if you look at his journey over the past 50 years, he's overcome almost every challenge that could face an artist. And you can only do that if you're gifted, you have special talents. He's a genius at the guitar. He's a genius with song. And I also wanted to lessen the burden on him going forward.
Before I let you go, I want to tell people about your upcoming live stream Christmas concert. It's coming Sunday, December 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Now, it's billed as Jose Feliciano and Friends. Jose, what can we expect? What can your fans expect? I know it's the 50th anniversary of Feliz Navidad, but it's a full-length concert, right?
Yes. I did some songs that Rudy Perez wrote, like Después de Ti Que, which was done by Cristian Castro. And
Spanish and English, all the big hits, you know, from Light My Fire to California Dreaming. And don't give away all the surprises, Jose.
I'm sorry.
People have to dial in.
They have to dial in. Please dial in. You're all invited. What I'd like everybody to do for me is make Feliz Navidad #1. It has to be #1, and you fans are the only ones that have the power to do that.
What is your message to folks this Christmas and into the new year?
Stop fighting and start loving each other, because that's what it's all about.
Beautiful.
That's what Jesus Christ said. Love one another as I have loved you. And if you can't do that, then there's something definitely wrong with you.
The 50th anniversary global live stream concert of Feliz Navidad featuring Jose Feliciano and Friends airs Sunday, December 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Check it out. Tickets info can be found at FelizNavidad50th.com. You can also order the new Feliz Navidad 50th Anniversary children's book in English or Spanish and all things Feliciano at FelizNavidad50th.com. I want to thank you all for supporting my first picture book this year. It meant so much to me. The Spider Who Saved Christmas. If you have any last-minute families on your list, you can go take a peek at it now. It's at discoverlegends.com. They have some ordering options, or you can go to the EWTN Religious Catalog, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and the Will Wilder series also makes a great stocking stuffer for those middle graders on your list. The World Over is also a podcast. You know this. Download us at iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. That's all the time we have. Be sure to catch us next week for our annual World Over Christmas special. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.